Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North week number 1 overview and analysis video. We're finally getting into the LTA. It's been a little bit of time, definitely, since we've seen a lot of these teams in action. Of course, one team representing the LTA at first stand. They were the first team eliminated from the tournament, and every other league has come back and gotten a, overview earlier than this one. So it's been the longest amount of time we could possibly wait for the LTA. I'm so excited to finally get back into covering some action here. There were a lot of really good matchups here in week number 1. Remember, we're still in the best of 1 stage. The first 3 weeks of the spring split here will be best of 1s, and then it transitions into 2 different groups, which are best of 3s, and then eventually playoffs and like play-in qualifications, yada, yada, yada. If you want a better breakdown of how this format ends up going and, what it is, you can check out the primer video up in the iCard. Not only is a format breakdown at the beginning of that video, but we do power rank every single team from number 8 to number 1 in the LTA North. I talk about what you can expect, kind of the floor versus ceiling for a lot of these teams and where I think they might end up landing. We, of course, go over every single player as well, so if you're interested in that, check that video out. But today, we're going to be going over week number 1, the 8 best of 1s. We got 4 for each day. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect to happen here in week number 1? Did these teams live up to your expectations? Were you surprised at all by any of the outcomes, or did things kind of go as you anticipated? I will obviously be answering that for myself throughout this video, but always curious to know what you guys think down in the comments section below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each game that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 8 as well, kind of talking about whether or not I think teams are better or worse than I was anticipating, or maybe they looked better or worse than they did in the winter split. Just kind of giving overall thoughts and opinions, but most of today will be spent talking about the games themselves. So, without further ado, let's get into our first game of week number 1, our first game of the entirety of the spring split, and it's, in my opinion, a battle between the 2 teams that I have at the top of my power rankings, number 1 and number 2, respectively. It was Team Liquid taking on FlyQuest, and FlyQuest is going to be able to pick up a very big win here, and quite frankly, this was a pretty dominant win from Fly. Of course, Team Liquid, the reigning LTA champions, coming off of winning the winter split. I would say in decently dominant fashion. Like, they weren't exactly great throughout the entirety of like the regular season or the qualification, part of the best of 3 stage, whatever you want to call that first, part, the domestic part, whatever you want to call it, that first stage where they only played other LTA North teams. They definitely looked a little bit more beatable there, but things, got figured out pretty quickly once they went to Brazil, and LYON in particular really stepped up as the best player in the LTA North. Unfortunately for Team Liquid, they definitely still have flaws, and there was a reason that they weren't alone at the top of the power rankings in terms of my tier rankings. FlyQuest was right there with them. I expected FlyQuest to be way better than whatever they were in the winter split. It felt like that team was off in just, one way, and it didn't feel like the individual performances were all that down, more so that the team just wasn't clicking in the right way. I think a lot of that was expected to kind of turn itself back around. It's why I had them number 2 in my power rankings, but this was a dominant start to the split for them. I mean, beating the defending champions is absolutely ginormous, especially when they're coming off of playing, at first stand, beating K-Corp at first stand. I get that they were the first team out, but they got to scrim a lot of those teams basically the entire time they were in Korea. They got a lot of good practice and experience at that level, and FlyQuest still was able to come out with a victory. So big stuff for them. I think that there were a couple of players in particular on Fly I want to highlight, but player of the game for me, maybe a bit controversially, is going to go to Quad in the mid lane. I love how Inspired played this game on Xin Zhao. I'm certainly not trying to take anything away from him, and I think it's totally fair that Broadcast gave player of the game to Inspired, but I think for me, the mid lane gap was ginormous in this one, and I really do think that that was a big factor as to why Fly had such an easy time playing throughout the mid game. Was Quad was so strong and in such a good position on the rise, especially over APA on the Ahri, who had a really bad game, and he was just able to completely run a lot of the macro plays that, this game ended up going in, that Fly wanted to make, and so he's going to get my player of the game here. Again, I don't want to take anything away from Inspired or from Bwipo, who I thought was also great on the top side. We'll talk about him in a second, but I think Quad's been this team's best player so far in 2025. I might have underestimated him going into the year. I feel like I basically have always underrated Quad. Like, that's something that's been pointed out to me pretty repeatedly in my comment section. Again, I come from the LCK background of Quad rather than, first seeing him in the NACL, and so maybe I had some preconceived notions, but he has been excellent throughout all of 2025, and this is a pretty massive accomplishment. APA, for all of his faults, faults as a player, as limited of a player as he is in terms of perception and like what we deem his playstyle to be, he was really good in Winter, and he was good in lane in Winter as well. To see him lose like this, while it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility, should just go to show you how good Quad is when he is able to generate a lead. So credit to Quad, he was excellent. Inspired was very good at being able to capitalize on the pressure generated by his solo lanes in the jungle. I really want to give him a lot of credit, because I think I didn't talk about him at all in the Winter split. I really just talked about Quad being good, and then, you know, Bwipo being very inconsistent as a reason that FlyQuest kind of got held back, but Inspired still was pretty solid, and I think he might have a re-breakout, I guess, spring split here, a dominant spring split, MVP caliber. I think that that's very much on the menu. Bwipo was definitely the better of these two top laners. Not that that is a surprise to anybody who watched Winter. Impact has been awful all of 2025. Up until this point, he's been like a bottom 3-ish top laner in terms of production in the LTA, and we'll talk about him a bit more as we go along, but he is just absolutely miserable right now, and Bwipo dominated that. The only negative of the game here for Fly is that bot lane kind of got trounced in terms of the 2v2. Now it's LYON and Core on Kalista Renata. Of course, they're going to be able to win lane at least decently consistently, but Masu and Busio were definitely not the strength of the team here. Quad was able to run everything. Inspired looked really good, and Bwipo dominated lane. Overall, it was the solo lanes and the top side of the map for FlyQuest that really ended up being the difference maker. And then for Team Liquid, that is the concern, right? The concern is not that LYON and Core aren't good enough for you to be able to dominate the LTA. Of course they are. LYON is the best player in the entire region, and Core is really not all that far behind. This is the best bot lane by a considerable margin, and they still were able to dominate in this game. They were so far ahead in the bot lane 2v2, it just did not matter because the solo lanes were absolutely destroyed. Dud of the game, really up in the air. Like, you want to give it to Impact, you want to give it to APA, it really should go to one of those two. I'm giving it to Impact because I'm really just so done with what Impact has been so far in 2025. I know I keep repeating the same thing, but if Impact keeps playing bad, I'm going to keep calling him out for being bad. Like, there's just nothing else left to say on that front. He can't play carries at this point in his career. It has been an absolute travesty trying to watch him take over a game on Gwen into a matchup where Bwipo just feels a lot more comfortable. This was a disaster for Team Liquid, and I'm serious when I say that he's been like a bottom 2, bottom 3 top laner, like worse than a lot of top laners on actual bad teams in the LTA in terms of production. It's been miserable. He was easily the single worst player at first stand, in my opinion, at the entire tournament, and he's a big reason why Team Liquid went home early at that tournament as well. I think he really is holding them back at the current moment. And then APA was also just horrible. Like, I get that, you know, Ahri is a champion that you can try and be a little bit more aggressive on, but he got absolutely destroyed in the 1v1 in terms of resources. He was already behind in gold by the time they hit the mid game, and then his positioning in the mid game was awful. He was tanking every bit of CC that Xin Zhao or Ryze or Nico could possibly offer. He was just dying over and over again on repeat, basically doing nothing. This was a gigantic solo lane gap in favor of FlyQuest, and Team Liquid's not going to be able to win games like that. was honestly fine, even if Inspired was great. wasn't the problem here, and like I said, LYON and Core were good, but the solo laners just completely let this team down. So Team Liquid coming off of a championship, but also coming off of a big disappointment at first stand at the international tournament they represented the region at. They needed to come out here and win, and they couldn't do that. FlyQuest was absolutely the better team on the day. It is just a best of one, and so you don't want to take too much off of this, but Fly very much could be the best team in North America right now, and I really wouldn't be all that surprised. Then moving on to game number 2 of day number 1, and this was a very intriguing matchup because I think a lot of people considered these two teams very close. It was Shopify Rebellion taking on Dignitas, and in a 54-minute banger, Shopify Rebellion is going to be able to come out on top. I stood my ground and said that regardless of what both of these teams looked like in the winter split, that Shopify is the 5th best team in the league and Dignitas is the 6th best team in the league, and fortunately for me, I looked correct in this particular instance. We'll see if that carries through throughout the rest of the week, but Shopify not particularly clean in terms of a victory, but at the end of the day, they got Nefiri, they got the dog, and therefore they come out on top in this banger. This was a very fun game, very back and forth, very chaotic, just not really a lot of macro plays going into it, more so just both teams trying to skill check each other, and neither team really playing all that poor really at any point. I think there are obviously things you can criticize because I don't think the gameplay was good or clean or what I would want to see from either of these two teams, but I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that I don't see the talent between these two teams after the game that they just played, because I do think there is a lot on display, but it also means that it's difficult to kind of really evaluate where these two teams are at, because this was more of like a scrim fiesta than it was like a stage game where you really get to see what they're capable of doing. For now, Shopify definitely has better hands, and they definitely had a better draft for moving later on into the game. Not that I hate Dig's draft or anything, just that if you're going to be playing it 50 minutes into the game and one team has Neferi Aurora and the other team is kind of relying on Rumble to be a giant option for them, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for the other team to win, and that's just what ended up happening. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. First off, congratulations to Seos for finally being able to make it here to North America and being able to play games with Shopify Rebellion. He has absolutely upgraded the ability of this team to play in the late game. He's just a better player than Zeyzal, and while he's not player of the game, you could see in B-Voy's individual performance just how different it was having a support that was a lot more aggressive and a lot more mechanically talented in terms of being able to play out those mid-game skirmishes. So, you know, ups to Shopify for bringing Seos in, for finally getting him as a starter here, but player of the game pretty obviously kind of has to go to contracts. I don't really think I can debate that with anybody else here. He played the dog, he played Neferi, he was able to take over the game, the damage he was able to do in the back half was ginormous. This champion is completely unbalanced at the current moment, completely broken. We've seen it dominate the LPL. We actually saw it be particularly unsuccessful at the LCK level, which is how you know the champion is really broken, because every broken champion just fails for some reason in the LCK. We've seen it in the NACL Tier 2 here in North America as well, so we know this champ. We know that Neferi can take over in the jungle. We know especially that the damage coming out is super consistent and pretty easy to execute, and Contracts was the most relevant player in this game throughout the back half. So excited for that. I'm still a fan of Contracts. I don't think he's ever going to be a star. Again, my opinion on Contracts has basically never changed. He's like the definition of a slightly above average jungler at this level, even slightly average, right? Like the overall output you're going to get from him is going to be a middle of the road type of jungler, but there are going to be games where he's way better than that and games where he's way worse than that. But over the course of the split, it all averages out to being a good jungler at this level, somebody you're happy to have if you're trying to be the 4th or 5th best team in the league. You can even get better than that, as we saw in Energy for a couple of years. But I also want to give a big shout out to B-Voy, because again, like, I was really expecting him to turn things around going into spring. I just didn't feel like we got the best version of him in winter. Not that I think he's a superstar. I think people were overhyping him at times last year in terms of what he was able to do, but I do think he was better than what he was in winter, and I think getting a real support in that can actually be aggressive, no offense to Zeyzal, but Seos is just better. Like, getting Seos in here, I think, is definitely a positive, and B-Voy definitely took advantage of that. Palafox looked better now that he got to play a melee assassin, essentially, in the mid lane. That's always going to be the thing that he feels more comfortable on. Fudge was fine. You know, Seos individually made some bad plays on the Leona, but again, the aggression, I think, is just generally a positive for Shopify to set up more plays. Like, this team is better now than they were in winter, and that's why I think they are the number 5 team, but this was not a blowout performance. I don't think this always goes Shopify's way, and if this is a best of 3, I would expect this to be a lot closer, but for Dig on the other side, you know, I don't even really want to criticize them all that much. There were moments here where they looked totally fine. I think you can point to someone like Tomo actually having a really good game on the Varus, all things considered. I was kind of out on Tomo after winter. It really felt like, not that he was a bad player by any means, but just the 80 carry pool in North America had gotten so much better coming out of the offseason that I didn't know if Tomo was going to be able to live up to the hype in the same kind of way he was able to do 100 Thieves, and more specifically with Isles on Dignitas at the beginning of last year. But he was really good here in game number 1, even with B-Voy, you know, actually having a decent game on the other side as well. He was kind of the damage carry for Dig in the back half of this. I think there is something in there where Tomo and Isles can still be a really dominant 2v2 lane. That's what they were on Dig in spring of last year. I just don't know how consistently we're going to be able to get that. That's a remains to be seen, a to be determined, but it was okay in its first look here. Shaden and Kana, who were the stars of Dig in winter, looked fine. They definitely weren't better than their counterparts. I think Contracts and Palafox had a better game than Shaden and Kana did, but still, you know, they weren't the problem here. Dud of the game, unfortunately, is going to go to Surdy on the top side. Saw a lot of optimism surrounding Surdy going into the spring split. I had less optimism surrounding his winter tape. I get that a lot of people were talking about, oh, he got punished really heavy by lane swaps, but Surdy had always been a player that had been able to adapt pretty well in those environments, and he was getting beat in more than just lane swaps. I think that was the concerning part to me, is when, you know, good teams didn't swap into him or felt like they didn't have to swap into him and they still were able to get big leads. Like, that's when it started to become a bit of a problem for me. And once again, he has a very big responsibility in terms of this draft, and I just don't think he was good enough in the back half of this game. Not that he was awful. I think that there were definitely, you know, moments where he looked fine, and there were better games, or worse games, I should say, that he had in the winter split than whatever this was, but still a concerning trend that he's not really able to beat up on, like, Fudge, right? Like, if you think Surdy is as good as some people, you know, tend to think he is right now, that I thought he was going to be coming into this split, this should not have been one of those matchups where Surdy is super passive and then ends up just not being very useful throughout the back half of the game. I just don't think that that's necessarily accurate. But once again, this was a banger. Everybody did something at some point. It was chaotic. It was crazy. It was fun. And Shopify was able to capitalize on that. But I just don't know how much better I feel about either of these teams walking out of this performance. walking out of this game, mostly because I just don't think we really got to see a good version of them at any point. Like, we got to see some mechanical differences, but the macro was just not there. I think both of these teams are kind of fighting it out for that 5th place spot, for playoff spots in the top 6, if you will, and, you know, maybe both of them are on pace, but Shopify definitely kind of solidifying their spot here. Then moving on to our third game of day number 1, and yet again, it's another one I was really excited for. It was 100 Thieves taking on Cloud9, and 100 Thieves is going to be able to pick up the victory here, kind of solidifying their spot as an upper tier team that they kind of proved in winter. I really did not think this roster was going to be able to make this work. Obviously, FBI and ALO were way better than anybody anticipated, maybe with the exception of me, because I've always been a huge defender of both of those guys, but really at the end of the day, they have a superstar on their team, and that's what makes them a contender, no matter what the rest of this lineup looks like. Quid is incredible. He is genuinely up there for one of the best players in the West, and it's not particularly close. Like, he's a top 3 to 5 player in the West. I think only LYON in North America can even make an argument to be better than him, but it is kind of an argument. LYON's team is better, and so he has more opportunity to take over, but Quid might be just as good as LYON is. I truly do think they could be on a similar level in terms of the grading scale. Quid, by the way, is player of the game, as you can see, but for Cloud9, they just did not have an answer to a hyper carry in the mid lane. Their mid lane got gapped. There really was no way for him to be able to keep up. He's just a worse player than what Quid is on the other side, especially when you're talking about their ability to 1v1 in lane. That's Loki's weakness as a player. It's always been his weakness, and that is certainly Quid's strength, being quote-unquote the main character of 100 Thieves here. That's not to say that Cloud9 didn't struggle in other areas as well, but this was a team that generally played pretty well on the top side and on the bot side throughout a majority of this game, but the middle of the map just ended up caving in and collapsing for them and not really allowing them to have a lot of pressure throughout this game. So we'll go ahead and talk about it here. Again, Quid is player of the game. It's not particularly difficult to say that. This guy's a superstar. His Azir, first and foremost, is his best champion. I think it's honestly getting to the point where I don't think you can give it to him. I get that the Yone is also incredibly strong, but I think the Azir has been better. He's not only a primary playmaking option for 100 Thieves on that champion, but because they have other players who are very adept at being carry players like FBI, even like Sniper on the top side, who's much more comfortable playing things like Riven, which he's now 7-0 on in the LCS and LTA. Like, Quid can be more of that engaged threat on Azir than you typically will see out of players here, but he doesn't have LEC Azir syndrome, as I like to say. He doesn't just go in and suicide himself in order to try to be the number one guy, the big playmaking option. If he feels like his best option is to just do damage on the backline, he'll do that as well. He just understands how to play the champion at a really high level. Again, going back to his Challengers League tape, it was always the champion we identified as being kind of the one for him. It was very similar to, you know, I don't want to say a player like Scout in that regard, but just somebody who wants a lot of those resources to be able to win late game team fights. Quid is that guy, and he continues to dominate North America in that regard. His mechanics are just better than a lot of the people that he's going into, and so he's able to generate leads that a lot of other people just aren't able to generate. But credit to the rest of this team as well. Want to give a big shout out to Sniper. I do think this is one of his better games in quite a long time. I've been kind of a Sniper doubter on this channel. The reason 100 Thieves has not really come in my top 2 in terms of my power rankings ever is because it's been difficult for me to believe that this team surrounding Quid is good enough to be, like, overall better than Team Liquid or FlyQuest or these rosters that I just feel are a bit deeper. But if Sniper is going to finally be able to turn that corner, step up, and kind of be what he was in his rookie split in spring of last year, rather than what he was in summer or what he was in winter at the beginning of this year, I think that is a gigantic difference maker. Now, this is his one trick on the top side here with the Riven, and Thanatos still was relevant throughout a lot of this game, and so I'm not going to sit here and say that Sniper decimated the top side or was dominant in a way that other top laners aren't going to be able to compete with. Like, I don't think that that's the case, but what I do think is that Sniper has the ability to grow into somebody that can be a real asset for this team, rather than, okay, we just hope he doesn't lose too hard on the top side to allow the rest of the team to carry, like he kind of has been over the past year. This was a good sign in that regard. FBI and Ayla continue to be one of the more consistent bot lanes in the entire West. I do think that when you're looking at how Sven and Vulcan played out the beginning part of this game, a lot of good things from Sven and Vulcan. From Sven in particular, I think his positioning was actually fine throughout a majority of this game, but FBI just ends up being an absolute menace in that final team fight, landing basically everything onto Sven and just, you know, making his life a living hell. FBI is just a god. Like, it is what it is. He's playing at top tier FBI level, and Ayla is really good on Renata. River was the sacrificial lamb in a lot of these fights, to to be the creator, but again, his tempo was better than Blabber's. So overall, just a good game for 100 Thieves and not a good game for Cloud9. The middle of the map is where you have to point to. I just don't think you can look anywhere else, as much as I think people are gonna, point to Sven, maybe being a little bit over-eager or kind of getting outplayed by FBI in the final fight. I don't think that was really the biggest problem throughout this game by any means. Thanatos was totally fine on the top side. Vulcan was really not the problem on the Alistair. I think Blabber and Loki just do not have chemistry as a duo, and that's a problem. Like, that's a real, genuine issue for Cloud9. Loki's going to get dead of the game for me, but this could very easily go to Blabber as well. Loki getting outplayed in terms of him versus Quid is a gigantic problem for Cloud9, not only because I'm already lower on Loki as a player, but because I do think that he gives this team a bit of a ceiling. I get that his playstyle does fit kind of the idea for what they want to go for. They wanted to go for a lower resource mid laner, somebody who's willing to kind of shove and roam and play for Blabber so that he could be more of a main character, a primary option for this team. But I think this team kind of failed to remember that when he was really at his best on Cloud9 back in 2020 and 2021, what I would consider to be like prime Blabber, he wasn't like the main character in terms of the players that he was playing with in the mid lane. Now, Niski can kind of be attributed to that idea, but like Blabber and Perks were awesome as a duo for a reason, because Perks could create a lot of diversions on the other side of the map and create overloads for Blabber where he could just get these 3v2 fights and really be able to take over in terms of his raw mechanical skill, and that's what allowed him to be like an MVP, superstar caliber player. I think when you're putting more pressure on Blabber to be the only option on this team, which he kind of is, with Loki as your mid laner, Sven as your AD carry, I think Blabber is going to struggle more in that role, and quite frankly, he has. He's not been a top 2, top 3 jungler so far in 2025, and he kind of needs to be in order for this team to even be close to being a top 2 or a top 3 team. Now, Thanatos can be that secondary carry, but it does make it a little bit more difficult when both your mid lane and your bot lane are supposed to be weak side, and your mid laner is just kind of getting beat in the 1v1 and losing a lot of resources that way, where you don't really count on Sven and Vulcan to be able to dominate the 2v2 because they're going into FBI and Ayla, who are just better than them. Like, Blabber's job is really hard on this team, and we talked about it in the primer. I don't think this team is set up for success in terms of the stylistic approach that this organization has taken this year, and I think they are struggling for that right now. That being said, if Loki can't survive in lane, it doesn't matter, right? Like, none of the stylistic points that we're trying to make even are relevant in any way if he's going to be a bottom 2, bottom 3 mid laner, because you can't lose the middle of the map in the current patch, especially with the team built around jungle like this team is. And so for Cloud9, there are very easy things that they need to fix, but man, do they need to fix them, and I'm honestly not so sure that they're going to be fixed. But for 100 Thieves on the other side, Quid is a superstar. He's like a genuine MVP frontrunner every single split, and as long as the rest of the team can be that next option up, like FBI can be that option number 2, and him and Ayla can be good in the 2v2, and River can enable Quid, and Sniper can just not lose on the top side, like we saw what this team can do. They can make finals, they can be a contender, because they really do have that top-end talent. And then capping off our action on day number 1, it was a battle of the two teams at the bottom of my power rankings coming into this split. It was LYON taking on Disguised, and LYON is going to pick up a big victory here. Not just a big one in terms of, getting a win against anybody is good for a team that I think did not look particularly good in Winter and has quite a few holes in their game, but the way that they won and who they beat, it's a pretty important win for LYON. Remember, you just have to not be bottom 2 in order to make playoffs at this level, and there's a real shot that LYON's not bottom 2, right? Like, either of these teams could have made that jump and could have made that leap, but them winning this so dominantly, I think, really puts them in the conversation. For DSG on the other side, I hate to say it, but this is probably the worst team in the LTA, and I think a lot of it just comes down to the team either not having chemistry or synergy or something like that, or just all of these players not having the mechanical skill to be able to play against players that are actually good at this level. And I feel really bad saying that, because there are good pieces on this team that I expected to do better, but man, there are pieces on this team that are not good. Like, mid and bot lane have not been good. Castle had a bad game, which makes it basically impossible for DSG to win, because XU can't play without winning lanes. And so it just ends up being a really big disaster for them. We'll talk about them a bit more as we go throughout. But for LYON, player of the game, again, very obviously in this one, is going to go to Saint in the mid lane. This guy's awesome. He's the best player on LYON. I underestimated him for sure coming in on what he was going to be from day number 1. I was right about Thanatos, like pumping the brakes on him being the number 1 top laner or whatever from day number 1. when he came over last year, it took him some time, I think, to weed out some of the problems in his game. And so I stuck to that mentality when talking about Saint, another player who came from the same system and had similar problems, in my opinion, where he just wasn't the most consistent player in the world. I think Saint's problems ended up being in the mid game rather than Thanatos' being in the late game. But Saint has not had those issues from day number one. He's just been a really good player. And I think part of that is that his laning ability in terms of, being able to beat up on mid laners that aren't as good as him is just really, really good. Like, his leads are just ginormous in terms of what he's able to generate 1v1. We just talked about how important it is for, mid laners to be able to win right now and be able to establish pressure to move around the map with their jungle at this level. And Saint can do that at a really high level, but he can do it on multiple champions. This is a guy who's really good at control mages, and he absolutely destroyed Abadaga on Victor here on the Yone. And I think that's really impressive to me that he's just very versatile. He can kind of fit into any structure. Saint has been really good since coming over here to the LTA, and he is the star for LYON, but I want to give a big shout out to LYON in this game because he was atrocious in the winter split. One of the reasons why LYON came in at number 8 is not because I thought that Saint was bad. I thought he was really good in winter, and Henna was totally fine. Everything we thought he was going to be, an average, 80 carry at this level. He's somebody who is playable at this level for sure, but LYON and Lions were just not good at all, and even Licorice really struggled on the top side here when you're talking about the winter split. But if LYON is going to step up and be really good on things like Sejuani and enable Saint to be able to, win mid lane even harder and move around the map and win the mid game, like that puts LYON in top 5, top 6 territory immediately, because really this is a team that has clear strengths and clear weaknesses. So if the weaknesses step up, that makes everything better. And LYON was really good here. Definitely the better of these two junglers. And I honestly considered him for player of the game because I really do think he was that important. Credit to Henna as well. Continues to be totally fine at this level. Scary Jerry has unfortunately not been good at all in the LTA, has not really put up much of a fight. Him and who he's 2v2 have been, they've been atrociously bad, like easily the worst in the entire league in my opinion in terms of what they've been doing there. I don't think Henna's a superstar. I think we're going to see that when he goes up against the good teams in the LTA. I just don't think he's going to be able to survive in the 2v2 against those guys, but he is good enough, absolutely, to be able to beat the players that are not quite as successful at this level. Lions had a really good playmaking game. Licorice was fine on the top side. Lion just felt a lot more complete than they did at any point in the winter split, and that's really all you need from them. We knew that Saint and Henna were good enough to be able to get top 6 with. It was really the other pieces, and right now the other pieces are doing fine. And then for DSG on the other side, if Castle's not winning, this team is not winning, and I think that really does illuminate just how bad they actually are. I think putting them at number 7 was generous because this team has a myriad of problems. They have the worst mid laner in the LTA. Abadaga is dud of the game here. They have the worst bot lane in the LTA, especially when you combine like what their output is going to be. And they have a jungler that can't do anything if the lanes aren't winning. Like, it's just a really bad recipe for DSG to actually be a competitive team at this level. Abadaga gets absolutely destroyed by Saint. I give him dud of the game, but if you wanted to give this to Scary Jerry, I think he more than deserves it on the Varus. He was one of the worst players in the entire league in the winter split. I love Scary Jerry, and I think he more than earned his call up here to tier 1, dominating on Dragonsteel last year on Maryville throughout the last couple of years, but he has always been a player that's really struggled year 1 at a new level, and unfortunately, I don't know if he's going to get the time to get used to playing at this new level because it just feels like, this is an org that might be in desperation mode at the current moment, and who he is certainly not helping. He's not playing up to that, like, all-pro caliber standard that he's been at in the past. If Castle's not winning, this team's not winning. Like, again, I hate to boil it down, but Castle is, like, the guy on Disguise. He was really able to be the primary carry option in the winter split, and quite frankly, he was the reason this team came in at number 7 over LYON, because out of Castle, Saint, and Henna, I trusted Castle the most. Coming into the split, that turned out to not be the case. He just wasn't useful here on the Gwen, and Gwen in general did not look good in week number 1 or day number 1, at the very least here in the LTA. XU is fine, but certainly not a star. Like, DSG just might not have the talent to be able to compete at this level, especially if they're just going to have 2 losing lanes every single game. So this team is definitely starting to concern me, and especially because at the end of the year, they're going to have to fight for their spot in the LTA. I really don't know if they're going to be able to defend that. I think that there are multiple tier 2 teams that are better than Disguised right now. And then for LYON, nice win. Glad to see Saint and Henna in particular doing well, but it's going to come down to LYON and Lions. They both were excellent in this game. If they're going to be able to keep that up, this team can be top 5, top 6. That's a very reasonable outcome for them. We'll see if they can do it against teams that aren't Disguised, because DSG probably is the worst team in the LTA, but one thing's for sure, LYON being ranked at number 8 in my power rankings coming into this split was not accurate. They are definitely better than that. But then moving on now to day number 2, kicking off the second half of week number 1, and our first matchup was between Cloud9 and Shopify Rebellion to kick off that second day, and Cloud9 is going to pick up the win. They're going to move to 1-1, Shopify will move to 1-1 on the first week here. This is again the expected result, but I think that there are more takeaways from this to have for both of these teams, because I think both of their identities are really starting to become very clear in my eyes. Both of what they are is becoming very clear in my eyes. Cloud9's one of those teams that might be way better than the bottom 4, that might be able to completely outclass the bottom 4 mechanically speaking and just be able to outplay them in a lot of instances, but at the same time, they might not be good enough to be able to compete with the top 3, because the way that they won this game, while good, is not something that I think is super projectable against teams that are just as good as them moving forward, and I'll talk about that a bit more as we go along. There still are very good moments here for Cloud9, and a couple of players that I really want to shout out just being really good and being the reason you should be excited about C9 moving forward. But for Shopify, on the other side, their solo laners are bad. Like, at this point, there's just nothing else left to say. I had optimism that Fudge was going to be better moving into spring. He got decimated by Thanatos, and yes, it's Thanatos. Like, Fudge got replaced on Cloud9 by Thanatos for a reason, because it was an upgrade, and obviously Fudge isn't expected to be the number 1 or number 2 top laner like Thanatos is, and so to see him lose in that regard isn't entirely surprising, but he needed to survive, and he didn't. Like, the top and mid lane gap in this game was absolutely ginormous, and that's where I think Shopify ends up really falling short. So let's go ahead and get into it. My player of the game is going to go to Loki in the mid lane here on the Taliyah. It did feel like he was the most impactful throughout the game. I think Broadcast ended up giving this to Thanatos. I do kind of understand why Thanatos was going to be an option here. Top and mid were both gigantic gaps, but I thought Loki had a better game than Thanatos did, and I think this is why I'm both optimistic and not optimistic about Cloud9 moving forward, because it's so encouraging to see Loki come out here and just be able to win a game as the primary option for Cloud9, because it's not really something that you expect to see from him or from C9 in terms of how they want to play the game, but it definitely was an option here. He just completely won the 1v1 and was really able to take over the game from that regard. However, the reason that that's concerning is because we already do kind of know that he's not going to be able to do that against top tier teams, and that is how they're beating Shopify. That's how they're beating the teams that are below them. If that's going to be a primary strategy, if they need Loki to be able to step up and create that pressure himself in the middle of the map, like, I don't know if that's a translatable skill against teams that are better than them. So obviously, it's good to see that Loki has it in him. It's good to see that he can walk out here and beat Palafox and be more relevant in the 1v1, but I just want to make sure that this is something that actually can translate, because the goal is not for them to be top 4. The goal is for them to be top 2. You basically have to be top 2 to go to Worlds if you're representing North America at this point, and I think Cloud9 is still a little bit of a ways away from that, especially with the way that they won this. But the players that I'm not concerned about for Cloud9 that are just positives for me without really a doubt, first of all, Vulcan in the bot lane. Like, Vulcan is incredible. He is a really good support, arguably the best in the region. It's him or Core JJ. I really do think that they are 1A, 1B in terms of what they have been over the past year and a half or so. I just don't think that they have had a lot of contenders. Like, I like Busio. I like how Ayla's been playing. You know, I think that there are players that theoretically could be in that conversation, but I think those two are kind of head and shoulders above the others in terms of their individual performances, and Vulcan was once again really good in this game, and Thanatos is probably the best top laner in North America, certainly the most mechanically talented top laner in North America, the one that's going to be able to generate the most amount of leads on his own. That's another good sign. Again, he just completely outplayed Fudge, but Blabber picks his worst champion here, and Vi ends up getting out-jungled by Contracts on the other side of this. Not a great look. Blabber has not started off the spring split in a very good form. Like, Sven was good here, and I'm certainly excited about Sven. I have no complaints about what he is, but he's not going to push your team over the top. If he's like your number 1 or number 2 player, you're probably not a top 4 team in the LTA, but it's all really going to come down to whether or not this middle of the map can be real. I trust Thanatos and I trust Vulcan. If Blabber and Loki can continue to win, if Loki in particular can be just like a top 4 mid laner in the LTA, which I think is possible for him, then I do think the doors do open up for Cloud9 to be able to get better. But right now, I'm just a little bit concerned that they can do that against Shopify and they can't really do that against teams that are in the top 3. But for Shopify on the other side, like, their solo laners are just bad. Fudge and Palafox were both absolutely horrendous in this game. Fudge is going to get dead of the game for me, but I do think it would be entirely fair to give this to Palafox if you prefer. I think it should go to one of them. Both of them got super outplayed in lane. Fudge was just not nearly as good as Thanatos. I think Fudge was worse in the back half of the game as well, which is why I'm going to give him dud of the game, and I think especially because the narrative is that Fudge should be the better of those two players, and he really has not been over the course of this year. Like, they need top lane to be okay. They need it to be a top 5 top lane. Like, they don't need it to be top half. They don't need Fudge to be a top 4 guy. I don't think he is a top 4 guy right now, but he should not be a bottom 2 2 top laner. Like, that is just inexcusable. At no point in his career has he ever been a bottom 2 top laner, and this is a guy who, mechanically speaking, even in terms of his individual advantages, was always near the top of a lot of leaderboards and a lot of statistical leaderboards because of what he was able to do on his own when he was on Cloud9. I can't imagine that all of that talent is just gone. I get that, situation does matter in terms of the ability to play out early laning phases, and obviously the game has changed quite a bit since Fudge was last in, pro play, but it should not be like this. Like, the Fudge we saw from 2023, 2024, like, that version of him, that's not who we're seeing right now in 2025, and that's just not good enough. Again, Palafox looks like a player that probably shouldn't be an LTA caliber mid laner. Him and Abadaga both look pretty washed in terms of how they played so far in 2025. We'll need to keep monitoring that, but Palafox was not good here. Contracts is really good and is the best player on Shopify Rebellion. He is pushing them forward. I get that he's playing Neferi, but he was up like 1k gold on Blabber throughout a majority of this game. People are going to point out that he got caught, and that really ended up costing Shopify. That basically lost them the game on the spot, and I get that it was a big mistake from Contracts, but they're not in that game at all without Contracts. Like, there is just no way that they can possibly play this out if he's not playing as well as he is. Bvoy and Seos, again, seem fine. Bvoy's a good player, and Seos does feel like an upgrade, but they're not a dominant bot lane by any means. Seos isn't Vulcan on the other side of this, and so Shopify definitely has a ceiling, but hopefully they can solidify themselves as a team that's below the top 4 and above the bottom 3. I think that that's a pretty realistic outcome for them, and this result doesn't really change that in my eyes. But Cloud9, like, their goal is not to be 4th. Their goal really isn't even to be 3rd. Like, you need to be a top 2 team if you're Cloud9 with the way that expectations were at the beginning of this year. Right now, they are not in that zone. They are not a team that I'm projecting to be anywhere near top 3, and that includes with this win. I think that there is a lot they still need to build upon, and they need to show that they can win in this kind of way against teams that aren't Shopify, against teams that are in the top 3, and that is still a big question mark for me. Then moving on to our second game of day number 2, and it is a Winter Finals rematch here between Team Liquid and 100 Thieves, and Team Liquid is going to continue their streak of beating down 100 Thieves by picking up yet another victory here. It feels like this team just has their number, and it does feel like Team Liquid is just specifically built to match up well, I would say, against 100T. FBI and Ayla can't really get going against LYON and Core. They're just too good of a 2v2 bot lane that FBI kind of has taken out of his game in that regard. Quid should theoretically, like, in theory, have a good matchup into APA because he is such a good laner, and APA's weakness has always been his laning, but that's not really how things end up going. APA is really good at being able to stall the game out and kind of take Quid out of his comfort zone and be able to take over later. That's what we saw in the finals when APA was really good, and the top side of the map that's typically been the weakness for Team Liquid of Impact and Umti, they actually have a pretty decent matchup in 100 Thieves. Sniper is not like a star, especially considering what the other top tier teams have on the top side, and I like River, but River's not a carry player. River's not the kind of player that can take advantage of Umti's mistakes. More so, River is there to help Quid and FBI get into good positions, and it's just a lot more difficult for them to do that with the way that Team Liquid is constructed, and so they've pretty consistently been able to pick up victories against this team, and once again, APA is going to get player of the game, and this is a guy that I think a lot of people have some polarizing opinions about. We'll just say, I think some ups and some downs for him over the course of his career. We saw the downs earlier on in this week when he played against Quad and FlyQuest, but here he's going up against Quid, and it does feel like he's able to get a lot of his mojo back. His Azir was easily the most relevant thing in this entire game. Quite frankly, he ran the entire mid to late game, and that's after a really bad early game overall from Team Liquid. I was really concerned. You looked at how Umti played the beginning part of this game, how Impact was not particularly winning on the top side of this map, and you started to be like, that's not good. They have a Neferi, they have a Rise, like, they should be able to win the mid to late game if they're just able to hang on if you're 100 Thieves, but they weren't able to hang on. River plays the worst Neferi game that I've seen in quite a long time, and APA is by far the best player in the game in the back half, and that's why they're able to walk out of this with a win. I really like APA. I think he's undervalued by a lot of fans and even by a lot of teams throughout the world. I think people don't understand that if you leave him on an island, if you put him in a position where he can just be comfortable getting to the back half of the game, he absolutely is the kind of player that can make you pay for it. He's way better than his reputation ends up giving him credit for, in my opinion, and I think he goes out and proves that every time he's given the opportunity to. He's not the star of this team, but he doesn't need to be. He is just a top 3 mid laner in North America, and I don't even think it's really all that up for debate. Like, I would take APA over even someone like, Saint right now. I think APA is at that level. He's a very good international quality player, so Good on him for showing that off. Want to give a lot of credit to Core JJ. I thought he was super influential in this game. Obviously, we know Poppy is very strong, but how have we not come to the conclusion that Poppy should be a permadraft against Neferi because it completely shut down what River was trying to do? Core was excellent throughout this game, and again, I think his 2025 so far has been better than his 2024. I was kind of low on what he was in 2024 because it felt like LYON was actually doing a lot of the work, but Core has really stepped it up and been like a big focal point for what they wanted to do this year. Not that LYON has been bad, still the best player in the LTA, and the fact that he can just outplay FBI kind of shows that, because FBI is a great player, but LYON is just better than him. And then, like I said, Impact, while he wasn't great on the top side here, definitely was good enough for you to be able to win with. Lost early, but didn't give over too many resources to the enemy jungler, and that allowed them to be able to survive. So, nice win for Team Liquid, getting themselves back to 1-1. This is probably the second best team in the LTA right now, but still a lot to figure out. And for 100 Thieves, this is a disappointing loss. I think you really wanted to try and pick up this win and go 2-0 in week number 1. If you had beat both Cloud9 and Team Liquid to go 2-0 in week 1, things look a lot different for this team and the outlook for this team, but it's just not meant to be. You know, Quid, FBI, I think that they were fine. Like, the main characters here of 100 Thieves weren't the problem. They just weren't able to get the leads that maybe they wanted to. I think Quid is more to blame than FBI was, because FBI at least tried. He just was worse than LYON. Quid should be able to beat APA and just wasn't really able to get a big lead. But dud of the game is very easy for me. It's going to go to River in the jungle. He cannot carry for this team. This was the case last year as well. I was really pushing back on the River hype train in summer of last year because, man, he just has to be like a facilitative piece. He doesn't really have much else left in him. He's just not a good carry player at this point in his career, and I think that's a really big limiting factor for 100 Thieves moving forward, especially with something like Neferi being so strong. Like, he was awful in this game. Not only was he bad in the early game because he should have taken advantage of Xin Zhao being very weak a lot more than he actually did, but like, dude, you had a gold lead and you did nothing with it throughout the entirety of the mid game. I've never seen somebody play Neferi this way, and it's probably the worst Neferi game I've seen. River's gonna need to be better than this. Again, put him on Sejuani, don't put him on Neferi. I think that's kind of what we're learning in order to kind of plan for 100 Thieves if you're moving forward. This team looks way better when River doesn't have to be a primary carry option. You know, Sniper continues to be fine, but exploitable on the top side. Ayla's scoreline is worse than what it actually was because he was the engaged person, and he ended up dying first in a lot of fights. But at the end of the day, if River had been like more competent, like this game becomes a lot closer. He just wasn't, and Quid needed to punish mid lane a lot harder, and that didn't happen. So 100 Thieves really settling into that number 3 spot. I feel very good about how I ordered the top 4 so far going into this. Obviously, Team Liquid's not the number 1 team with that loss to FlyQuest, but outside of that, everything else was pretty on point, in my opinion, and having Fly that high, I think, was something that not every team, not every analyst was going to have coming into this split. But for Team Liquid, they are, at the very least, still a top 2 team. I think that they will continue to get better, and I think people are going to underestimate them because they do have some flaws. Every team in North America has flaws. Nobody right now is perfect, and this team has a lot going for them, and I think the things that people criticize are better than people give them credit for. So I still like Team Liquid. I still think they're very good, and they proved that here. Then moving on to our third game of day number 2, and we finally get a matchup that's a little bit more lopsided. It's FlyQuest taking on Disguised, and FlyQuest is going to pick up the pretty easy victory here. I say easy because at the end of the day, it wasn't really up in the air whether Fly was going to win this game. It was more so just when they were going to win this game, but Scary Jerry, man, oh my god, what a performance from him on the Ezreal. Easily his best game at the tier 1 level. A really important thing to see for Disguised, to imagine a world where they are competitive. Unfortunately for Scary Jerry, the rest of his team really let him down once again in this one. It doesn't really feel like at any point there's going to be more than one winning lane on DSG at any given time, and that's really just not a great place to be. But FlyQuest is a really good opponent. It's not a gigantic disaster that DSG ended up falling in the way that they did. You maybe just hoped that they looked a little bit different in the way that they fell, but come on, man. York game. York's crazy. This champion's so stupid. Whippo's gonna get player of the game. How does he not? Did anybody watch that clip of him just throwing a bunch of goons at Castle and him just like passively dying like way back in his own base? Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, York is very funny. Whippo is obviously very good at these off-meta champions that people aren't quite prepared for, and he was awesome. He was super impactful this game. I'm not gonna sit here and say he was definitely the most impactful, but he certainly was the most noteworthy in this game, so he is gonna get player of the game for me. But I don't want to take anything away from what Quad was able to do on the Taliyah. Quad had an incredible week number 1, in my opinion. I don't think people are talking about it enough. I get that he went into Abadaga here in game number 2, and that's definitely, you know, a little bit of an easier matchup, we'll just say, in terms of how things have gone, but he decimated APA in their first game, and he decimated Abadaga here in the second game. He's doing everything he's supposed to do. The Taliyah was everywhere on the map, constantly dealing a ton of damage. I think he did more damage than Masu this game. Correct me if I'm wrong on that down in the comments. At the very least, it was close. Like, Quad was ridiculously good on the Talia here, and he's just been a gigantic asset for FlyQuest, the best player on this team throughout 2025 so far. Inspired had yet another very good game on the Xin Zhao. He's just somebody who's really good at being able to control tempo in the mid game. Again, he's a lot more focused on being a late game player. It's always kind of been his identity, but he still is good in the early game. It's not like he can't play that stage, and he's definitely better than XU. Masu and Busio were fine. Scary Jerry was incredible, and certainly the best bot lane player on the other side. This is the second series in a row where Masu is on the winning team and was not the better AD carry. Just kind of is what it is. I'm not even really blaming Masu for that. I don't think it's entirely his fault, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, FlyQuest has more than enough firepower to be able to take advantage of DSG's weaknesses, which in this case were top and mid. And for DSG, their weaknesses were top and mid. First off, I gotta talk about Scary Jerry. Like, I would be remiss not to mention him and not to bring him up as, like, he was probably the best player in this game. I genuinely think if you're just looking for, like, a pure player, like, evaluation perspective, Scary Jerry dominated this game and was probably, like, the #1 graded player for me. I just can't give him player of the game because, you know, not only did he not win, but he didn't really help contribute to the win either. He just was playing really well while the rest of his team was completely on fire, and that's great for him, but it just isn't quite a player of the game worthy type of thing. But I certainly considered it, and the fact that I did consider it in the first place should go to show you just how well Scary Jerry played. Again, if he's going to play more like this, or if this is something that we can continue to see growth in, that does raise the ceiling of what DSG can be. Obviously, he can be a primary option on an LTA team if he continues to grow. It's just not really been an option so far this year, but again, like we said, solo laners just completely let him down. Abadaga gets obliterated by Quad. He had a miserable week, in my opinion. Easily the worst mid laner right now in the LTA, and I think there is competition for that, but he is winning. Him and Palafox are really duking it out at the bottom of the standings, in my opinion. And then Castle's gonna get done of the game. Like, how do you lose this badly on the top side as a Korean Jace into a Yorick? Like, this just should not be happening for Castle. This is a guy who was expected to be a really big positive for DSG moving forward, and arguably the best player on the team. I certainly had him graded as the best player on the team, and he was awful in week #1. Arguably the worst player in the entire LTA. No spoilers for dud of the week, but he's certainly within the realm of conversation for that. It just was a really, really not good week, and I get Bwipo is a very good opponent, but this was happening earlier on against, like, LYON as well, against Licorice, who was not, like, a dominant top laner or anything. Castle absolutely should be better than Licorice, and he wasn't, so it's just disappointing to see. Again, I think DSG just has too many problems. XU is fine, but he's like a slightly below average jungler, and he's not really going to push this team forward. Who he has not been good. In fact, he had one good play early on in this game and then became basically invisible, and that's with his AD carry popping off throughout a lot of this. Like, this was Scary Jerry versus the world, and that's just not good enough. In the winter, it was Castle versus the world. It seems like that has transitioned down to the bot lane, but for Fly on the other side, nice win, nice 2-0 week. I expected this team to be able to bounce back, and they have done exactly that. Picking up the win over Team Liquid is obviously a little bit bigger, but this is still a nice win for Fly, and especially because their solo laners look incredible. Maybe I want to see the bot lane pop off a little bit more if I have to be a little bit critical of them in some way, but this right now is probably the best team going into week 2 in the LTA, and I'm excited to say that. But that's going to bring us to our final game of the week here in week #1, and it was Dignitas taking on LYON, and LYON's going to go 2-0 in week #1. They're going to pick up yet another victory. Granted, it's against probably the two worst teams in the LTA in Disguised and Dignitas, but still, this is a win that I don't think a lot of people would have anticipated going into this split. I think Dig were favorites going into this game, and LYON just kind of proved that they were the better version of what Dig is. Both of these teams have what I would consider to be like 2.5 capable players. Saint and Henna are obviously the two big ones on LYON, but, you know, I think Licorice could, in the right circumstance, be good. They actually draft Neferi top for him in this game, which is very interesting, and then Dignitas have Shaden and Kana, who I think were really, really good in the winter split, and really good as a duo, but Tomo's kind of that half. You know, there's going to be times where Tomo looks good, and I like Isles. I think Surdy can be a positive. He just hasn't been so far. Like, you know, there are takeaways. I think Odie obviously was really good in their first game for LYON, and, you know, there are takeaway players, but at the end of the day, it was really just which mid laner was going to be better, and Saint was the better of these two mid laners, which means that LYON is the better team as of right now. Saint is going to get player of the game here for the second time this week. Really an excellent start to the spring split for him. Now, I am going to hype him up, but this is going to be both a plus and a minus segment for Saint, because I do think some of the conversation is just a little bit farther than I'm willing to take it right now. People are calling him like a top 2, top 3 mid laner in the LTA. Maybe that's true. Like, maybe that gets proven. He has shown nothing at this point to have me believe that that is the case. He took down the two worst teams in the entire league. There is still a lot to like about Saint because, man, like the Rise Gold hack was absolutely online in this game. His ability to generate resources on that champion was absolutely spectacular, and Kana was really good in the winter split, and so to see Saint just kind of be better than him in terms of the 1v1 was really impressive. But again, like beating up on Dignitas in Disguised, like not exactly the most, oh my god, you're definitely better than APA thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I think I saw a comment where it was like, you could make the argument all 5 of the top 5 mid laners in the league are from the LCK Challengers League. I think if you were to make that argument, I would take you completely unseriously at the LTA level. Like, there's just no way that you can make that argument and have me believe that. If you think that, like, APA is worse than Loki, like, I don't really know what to tell you. Like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm going off topic here, but Saint is good. I just need to see more from him. Like, obviously, he's done a great job at being able to take advantage of teams that are not cohesive, that are not really all that great in the early game. But we saw in winter, like, he was still competent against good teams. He just wasn't able to get gigantic leads on his own in that regard. Maybe he has taken that next step going into the spring split, but it is still a bit to be determined. For now, he decimated every single game that he played this week. Both of the games he played looked fantastic. It was just against a low level of competition. And so, is he a top 4 mid laner? Yeah, I think he's a top 4 mid laner. Can he go higher than that? Absolutely. This guy has top 1 potential, like, has always had top 1 potential if he can grow into it. He just might grow into it a lot faster than I was anticipating. I do want to give another shout out to Odilan. Quietly very great this week for LYON, like very, very good. He completely outplayed Shaden on the other side of this matchup, and that is certainly not something I anticipated. Shaden is a good player. Yes, he can be pretty feast or famine if he loses early, which he did in this game, and his laners were not doing him any favors, but Odie has just been a really good facilitator so far. Hopefully that keeps up. Licorice was fine on the top side. Henna continues to look good as an AD carry when facing bad teams. You know, Lions is definitely surviving against bad teams. Like, all of this comes down to, I'm really glad that LYON went 2-0 and they're clearly a top 6 team at the current moment, but I hear a lot of hype kind of talking about them as somebody who could be top 5 or even compete for top 4. A lot to be determined in that regard. There's still a lot for them to be able to prove. Remember, this is a team that did not win a single series in the winter split. They were one of the first 2 teams eliminated from the LTA. They still have a lot to prove, but so far it's on the right track. They're definitely better than they were in winter, which is a good sign. But for Dig on the other side, no way for them to be able to keep up when Kana and Shaden lose. Like, Kana and Shaden are this entire team. I like how, like, Tomo and Isles played this game out. I still think that their 2v2 is pretty solid, but their star, like, the Dignitas brand of League of Legends right now is built through the middle of the map, and both Shaden and Kana got absolutely obliterated by their opposition. Kana is going to get my dud of the game. I give a lot of player of the game and dud of the games to mid laners throughout this week. I just think it was a very mid lane centric week in the LTA. I hope you can understand, but Kana got completely outplayed on the Tristana. This is the worst he's looked in the LTA so far. He was good, and like, not just like fine, but actively good, actively pushing the team forward in winter. Like, he was a top 4 mid laner for me coming into this split based off of what we saw at the beginning of the year. Saint completely flipped that, completely outplayed him and showed that he is better. Shaden, also very feast or famine player, got outplayed by Odie, who was the worst jungler, arguably the worst player in the entire league in the winter split, so that's not ideal. Surdy continues to not have any pressure on the top side. He continues to be way too aggressive without really any sense of backup. It doesn't feel like he's going to be successful with this iteration of the team. And like I said, Tomo and Isles were probably the best part of the team in this game, but it's not like they won. Like, this was a dominant LYON victory. It was not particularly close. So, you know, for Dig, they're a bottom 2 team right now. I think they still have the upside to be better than that. They were top 6 in the power rankings coming into this for a reason. Like, again, they can usurp LYON by the end of this split, but now, especially because this is single round robin in terms of getting these groups sorted out, like, you gotta get online, like, sooner rather than later. It doesn't feel like week 1 was a very good showcase for them, and it was a great showcase for LYON. The question isn't, can they beat Dig in Disguise, though? Now it's, can they beat Shopify? Can they even, you know, compete with Cloud9? Like, those are the questions that are on the table, and I think the fun thing is that they are on the table. They were not on the table a week ago. They are on the table now, so I'm excited to see where LYON goes, but the big tests are still to come for them. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North week number 1 overview and analysis video up on your screen now. You can see the updated standings after 1 week of action. Of course, a lot of ties here right in the middle. Any ties are just going to be broken alphabetically. No favoritism attempted to be shown in the standings, but that favoritism will be shown in my power rankings, which you can see at the top of the column on the right for every single team. Power rank is where I personally power rank them from number 1 to number 8. Change is going to be how that has changed from last week or my preseason season analysis to now. We can talk about the risers and the fallers here. FlyQuest is going to be jumping up to number 1. They beat Team Liquid. They looked really good on day number 2 against Disguised as well, and I get that that's an easier matchup, but FlyQuest looked about as good as you could possibly ask for this week. It really did feel like everything was clicking for them, like all lanes were kind of going their way. Bot lane was the only one where it didn't feel super dominant, but mid lane, top lane looked great. Inspired had a really good week. Everything just kind of felt back for FlyQuest, and this is a team that absolutely should be at the top of the standings. I think from a player-to-player perspective, when you stack them up, roster-wise, you know, for with the rest of the league, they're number 1, I think, in a lot of people's eyes, and so it's not shocking to see them beat Team Liquid and kind of take their spot at number 1, at least for now. And then TL is only going to fall to number 2. I still think they're the 2 best teams right now in the LTA. That was kind of solidified with Team Liquid's win over 100 Thieves, but they are on more thin ice. 100 Thieves going to stay at 3, Cloud9 going to stay at 4. These are the top 4 teams, but at least so far this week, the ranking of them became pretty obvious with the matchups that we got. FlyQuest beat Team Liquid beat 100 Thieves beat Cloud9. Everything kind of falls into place. Shopify is going to stay at number 5 for me. I still think there is a reason to believe that they are the best of the rest at the current moment, although I think it is up for debate. But LYON, with their 2-0 week, is going to jump up to number 6. Unfortunately for them, they beat the teams that I have at number 7 and number 8 in my power rankings, respectively, being Dignitas and Disguised, and so I just can't justify putting them above number 6. But if they come out and beat Shopify Rebellion, you better believe they're a top 5 team. If they come out and beat Cloud9, who knows? Maybe they could even be a top 4 team. They looked really good in week number 1. It's all just about finding that consistency. So those are my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below, but let's go ahead and jump into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 1 here. My player of the week is going to be pretty obvious to basically anybody who watched the LTA this week. It's going to go to Saint, the mid laner for LYON. This was not up for debate. I loved the FlyQuest guys this week, the solo laners in particular, which you can see as my honorable mentions, but I didn't have to think too much. Saint was the best player in the LTA in week number 1. Again, the only concern that I have with him is that he did it against the 2 worst teams in the league. If he can do this against Shopify, or specifically if he can do this against Cloud9, because I do think he's better than Loki by a pretty considerable margin, all of a sudden we're talking about not only LYON, but Saint as a completely different animal, right? Like LYON becomes a team that's near top 4, and Saint becomes a player that's in the MVP conversation. That's the kind of week that he had. Again, still a lot to be determined with him, but really no other choice for player of the week in week number 1. And then my honorable mentions, the 2 FlyQuest solo laners, Whippo and Quad. Both of them were absolutely excellent here in week number 1. Quad is definitely the one I feel really almost got player of the week for me. Like, he really was fantastic for the team this week, but Whippo, obviously on the Yorick in game number 2, deserved a shout out. And it's not like he didn't gap impact in game number 1 as well. So great week for FlyQuest in general, but Saint is going to steal that player of the week. And then my dud of the week, it's going to go to Castle, the top laner for Disguised. He had a really bad start to the spring split. Hopefully he's going to be able to turn that back around, because you have to remember, he was the strength of that team in winter, and it is just 1 week. It was just 2 games. I don't want to freak out too much, but he looked awful. And that's with a player like Scary Jerry really stepping up and being a lot better than he was in the winter split here, especially in that second game. So a lot to build upon for Disguised, but Castle is going to get my dud of the week, and Saint is going to get my player of the week. But that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We'll be posting about the rest of the LTA North every single week on this channel. We also cover all 4 of the major regions, so LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week, as well as the NACL Tier 2 here in North America. If you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.